YouTube, it's Kathy, and this is my weekly entertainment wrap-up for December 15th through 21st. This week I read 2 books, I watched 2 shows, and I listened to 2 books. This is not my usual setup. I am visiting my parents for the holidays, which means that this week and next week, the last 2 weeks of 2019, will both be filmed here. Also, if you can hear that weird sound in the background, my dad is washing windows outside. The first book I finished this week was part of the Reindeer Readathon, and that was Semi-Charmed Life. This is a book that had been on my shelf for a while and moved around and I hadn't read it, and it wasn't great. This book is about this woman going into her last year of university, and I believe she was studying journalism or at least creative writing, and she stumbles into this position where she is working for this socialite and running her blog. And it basically goes from her life being absolute shit to her living with this person and going on these grand adventures because rich people do that all the time apparently. And not only did I have logistical problems with this, for example, the socialite was also going to this university and moved into that type of housing, which makes 0 sense because obviously she can afford to live elsewhere. But she moved into one of the dorm room type of things and suddenly it was like magically a gajillion times bigger than it should be, which didn't make any sense whatsoever. Additionally, there were points in the text where people were very judgmental, there was fat phobia, there were a bunch of things that just were not explained, which I can be okay with, but not when I'm also really not enjoying the text. Kind of the only part I was okay with was there was this budding romance between her and the socialite's boyfriend, but because he was her boyfriend, she was like, no, I can't possibly go after this guy because he's spoken for. Which was actually nice to see, as opposed to seeing a character being like, oh, but I could be with him and be much better for him, which is a narrative I've seen before, and I'm like, lady, no. I will only be okay with that kind of narrative if you then entered the world of polyamory and talked about that, and then you can have more than one partner. But none of the things I'm thinking of even probably knew that was a real thing that you could do, so not giving anybody credit for anything. The other physical book I finished this week was Birthday by Meredith Russo. This takes place between these 2 different characters that were born on the exact same day in the same hospital during the same freak snowstorm. Because of this, the families got fairly close and they celebrated all of their birthdays together, even though there's a little bit of economic imbalance between them. Morgan lives with her dad in a trailer after her mom died of cancer a little while ago, and then Eric lives with his very affluent family, kind of star quarterback boys in the family type of thing. We start out when they're turning 13, they're at their birthday party at the water park, and Morgan wants to tell Eric that she is a girl. That doesn't quite go as planned, and from there we see them on all of their birthdays from 13, 14, 15, 16, all the way up to 18. And this was an interesting way to tell a story because you could see these characters progressing throughout the years, but you only got them on this one single day of the year, which was very interesting. Because nobody knew that Morgan was a girl, obviously she was going through a lot of stress and trauma and trying to fit back in. At one point she figures if she can't come out as a girl, she doubles down on being a boy, which is something that she left behind around the time her mother died. And this was absolutely touching and heartbreaking, and I read it in a single day. On other shows I watched, the first one being The Crown. Weirdly enough, I watched episodes 5, 6, and 7 with my best friend, and then when I came back to the Comox Valley, which is where I am now, to visit my parents, I made them watch the first episode because I figured it would be something they would enjoy, and even my dad was like, I could see why people would watch this. This really does grip you in. The Crown is a TV show about the royal family in England. From these episodes, it's kind of their time through the 40s and 50s, and my understanding is later in the series they will progress through the decades and some of the actors even get switched out because obviously somebody can't play the Queen in the 40s and then play the Queen in the 90s because there is quite an age gap. I mean, we've gotten to the point where makeup technology could make that happen, but I know that some actors get switched out, which is interesting. Also, it was weird watching with my parents because my dad was like, oh, is that the guy that's dying when Prince Philip came on screen? And I was like, no, the character right now that is having health problems is the king. And I'm like, oh, you mean currently, like actually in our timeline, in our real world. Yeah, Philip's not doing so great right now. So it's weird to watch this show about these characters, many of whom are still alive or have been alive in my lifetime. The other show that we watched quite extensively last night was the Log Channel. We flipped through a couple of different ones. Some of them had the fireplace like really far back in the shot and then like a Christmas scene around it, and we turned those off immediately because we didn't like them. And then we settled on this one that is just the fireplace. But this one was fairly active, so we think it was about an hour-long loop, but every 5 minutes or so somebody would like walk by the fire or poke the fire or add things to the fire or use a billows, which my dad was just like, this is ridiculous. You did not need to billows that fire. We spent a lot of time critiquing these people's fire skills. It was fun. Always something fun to do while drinking with your parents is critique the log channel. On to the books I listened to this week, the first one being I Let You Go. This is a thriller that starts out very, very slowly. A tragic thing does happen. Within the first few pages, a character dies, and this is all about who killed that character. And the first section goes back and forth between the mother who has lost a child, as well as the people that are trying to solve this crime, so the detectives. This also takes place in the UK, so if you're a fan of UK accents, listening to this one is definitely a good time. I really enjoyed the narrators because we had a male narrator for half of it and a female narrator for the other half, and both of them were great. Once we get through that first part, which I said is slow, but I don't mean that as a criticism, I actually really liked how slow it was. It wasn't a fast-paced thriller at that point, but once you get past that first section, you come to realize something very important to the plot, and from there it becomes much more of a heart-paced, pumping thriller. I felt that the way that this was written was beautifully done. I did not see that big switch coming whatsoever, and I became very invested in both the personal lives of the detectives as well as this mother, and then I could see as it was happening how all of this came together, but it kept me guessing enough that even though I was really hoping for a certain outcome, I didn't know if we were going to get it. If you're in the mood for a thriller, I highly suggest reading this one. On a side note, I also just love this title because it plays out in a few different ways in the narrative, and that's just brilliant. I love when the title really works for a story. The other book I listened to this week made me cry while I was walking down the street, so fortunately it was raining and nobody could tell. It would also make me swear at random points, and justly so. That book is Just Mercy by Bryan Stevenson. This is a narrative nonfiction book. There's actually a movie of the same title coming out. I didn't realize when I saw the preview for the movie the last time I was at the cinema that it was based on a book, and as soon as I found that out from Jesse over at Bowties and Books, I immediately picked up the book and had to listen to it. This book is about Bryan Stevenson's time working for a non-profit that specifically is trying to get people off death row and make sure that people that were wrongly convicted have their convictions overturned. This taught me so much about the legal system in the States and how it is heavily skewed. These are things that I already knew. I already knew that the prison population is skewed when it comes to the population of America towards imprisoning people who are of color and giving them harsher sentences, but this just reinforced that knowledge, and I had so many emotions while reading this book. It's also narrative nonfiction, which is my favorite type of nonfiction, but my favorite thing about that is even though you could just view this as stories and things that never actually happened, I never got that sense. I knew that all of these people he was talking about were real people facing real circumstances, some of them completely wrongly convicted, like had nothing to do with anything, and the police just decided they didn't like this person and would frame them. I am so glad that I listened to this because I feel like all of these stories deserve to be heard, and when the movie comes out, I am definitely going to watch it. That's it for this week. If you read, watched, or listened to any of these, let me know about it down in the comments below. On the way down to the comments, if you hit that subscribe button, that would be very nice of you. You can like and share this as you see fit, and I will see you very soon. Bye!